Hui Ying, thank you very much for your presentation. Some very insightful pieces to that to take away. I think I just wanted to set the scene around what we're doing on this panel session today. What we're hoping to do is look at workplace models that are prevalent in the Singapore market and outside, and look at where flexibility is going. I think that's probably the biggest question on most occupiers and investors' minds at the moment. And to me, it's something that's not really bottomed out yet. It's still changing. I think with flexibility, there become a lot of benefits. There also come quite a number of challenges. So the idea of the panel session is really to look at both the benefits and the challenges, to look at it with a very balanced scorecard. And what I mean by that is look at it from an occupier's perspective, as in the employer, but also look at it from the employee's perspective. I think the employee's perspective has been covered quite a lot in the press and has got quite a lot of column inches over the course of the last 2 years, but the employers has potentially got less. So what I'm hopeful is we can have a fairly candid discussion with the panelists around where this sits with their organisations and where their views are, and hopefully give some insights on the benefits and equally how you overcome some of the challenges. So with that, I will introduce the panelists that we have here today. So first up on the far end is Manjit Singh. Manjit is the COO ASEAN for Ogilvy, and he's responsible for strategy and operations across all of their ASEAN offices. He's got over 20 years of experience in leading digital transformation, expansion and change management across the region. Welcome, Manjit.
Thank you.
Nick Hughes sitting next to him. Nick's head of workplace within the Asia property team at Standard Chartered Bank. And Nick is responsible for managing teams that deliver projects across the region, whether it's FM, whether it's design, whether it's project management. And Nick's been in and around Asia for a long time and has over 25 years of international experience. Welcome, Nick. And then immediately on my right is Hugh Andrew. Hugh's the Managing Director at BlackRock Real Assets. And Hugh's responsible for the management of BlackRock's Asia property fund portfolios. Hugh's been in and around Asia also for a long time, principally based out of Hong Kong or based out of Singapore. Interestingly, Hugh also sits on the APAC Investment Committee for BlackRock and sits on the Global Real Asset Talent Committee, which is quite key to part of this conversation. So if I may, I'll kick off with the questions, and I'll start with you, Hugh, if I may. So the first question really, I mentioned earlier, there's a myriad of commentary we've seen in the market around what organisations are doing around flexible working. At one end of the spectrum, you've got people saying, I want people 100% back to the office. At the other end of the spectrum, people are saying, we're happy with full work from home. So my question to you really is, what does sort of workplace flexibility look like in your current organisation? And a second part to it, given your remit, what observations do you have around the occupiers in your portfolios here or overseas? And is there a kind of difference in different geographies as to how they're adapting to different workplace flexibility?
Sure. First of all, great to be here, Chris. Thanks very much for the invitation. So BlackRock, we're adopting a thing called the future of the workplace. And from the 1st of June, globally, it was piloted in the US at the beginning of the year, but globally now, people will have the choice to work 3 days in the office and 2 days at home. They can work more days in the office, but that's where we've ended up after a huge amount of debate, review, consideration. I don't know whether that will be the solution. I suspect that it'll be reviewed after 6 months or so and then perhaps changed. What we have found here in Singapore over the last month or so has been a massive increase in the number of people coming to work, and it has changed the dynamic from the last 2 years. You almost forgot what it was like pre-2020, and so I'm very encouraged by having more people in. To balance that, I don't feel that we've lost anything from our people over the last 2 years. Technology has allowed them to work effectively from home. I think in a lot of cases it's probably improved their work-life balance, particularly those that are primary caregivers. It's allowed them to be a little bit more flexible in balancing the needs of their home life. And I think the firm probably alongside many other firms, where people are the key thing. We don't own factories or roads or cars. People are what drives our business. You know, we're seeing a very positive change to the work environment. As a owner or as a manager of assets on behalf of our investors, I think it's our obligation, really. You know, we've got to try and create value for the investors. Value comes from rental income. So you want full buildings at the best rents that you think you can achieve. So our job really is to provide the box in which occupiers operate the best. And so we're very open, we're listeners, we've got big ears. We want to understand what different occupiers need. We can't satisfy them all, and I think some companies will make decisions about changing the building they're in, changing the locations they're in, because that suits their needs best. But there is no one size fits all. But I'm not trying to get out of answering the question, Chris. It's our responsibility, and I would hope Nick would agree with me as an occupier and a customer, that you know, we just want to be open and flexible to understand what people need.
And BlackRock's position is the same globally, or that's a Singapore position?
Nope. They decided to set a global benchmark for the future of the workplace, and it was piloted in the US, and it's been, as I understand it, very successful so far. I would imagine that as part of that ongoing review, geographical differences will have some sort of bearing. But BlackRock, we have a very often used phrase, which is we are one BlackRock. So the firm likes to have a single perception.
Okay, and then in the portfolios that you manage, because they're across various different jurisdictions, do you see any differences in the occupiers that are in your buildings in terms of how they're managing that are discernible sort of one country to another? And where I'm kind of going with that is, if you look at Singapore, the transportation system is fairly easy, so getting in and out of the office is quick. If you go to another jurisdiction, the traffic, the commute might be a lot longer. Any sort of thoughts or observations around that?
Yes, I think Shanghai, Tokyo, much more traditional work ethic. So people are still expected to come to the office.
Okay.
This is outside of BlackRock, I think. This is the occupiers that we've seen. So we're not seeing a huge amount of change. Obviously, Shanghai is very different at the moment, but that does seem to be easing. The rest of the locations, Australia, you know, had a very similar regime to the Singapore process, and they're now very much fully back in. But the outcome is that we've realised as leadership groups that people can work from home, and it's not depletive to their ability to get things done. What we miss, I think, is probably that very intangible bounce that we get in seeing and sitting with people and talking to people. It's not quite the same. Mm. Also, you know, some people perhaps who would shy away from a call can easily say they're busy, and you know, there's a little bit of that goes on. But the occupiers, I don't think BlackRock are any different from CPD Grade A occupiers. I think we're quite similar. But we're looking at some ideas, as you know, Chris, in Asia Square, which we manage for a separate account here. You know, we're going to build a tenant lounge, which is going to be a free service. It's not a business centre. It's not a co-working facility. It's just an extra bit of space that tenants can use to have some flexibility.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Nick, if I can move to you. SCB over the last sort of 6-9 months have kind of blazed a trail in terms of your view on flexible working and how that sort of strategy has been put together. So for the people watching, could you give a sort of view on where SCB's strategy is? Equally, how that was decided and agreed across the firm, so from the real estate team through to the boardroom level. And then the last sort of piece to that, sorry to add sort of 3 questions in one hit, would be what's the feedback thus far from the employees?
Right, yeah, certainly. Just to start with, that Standard Chartered has always, for the last 10 years, had a flexible working policy, although it wasn't really adopted by many people, but it's always been there. But I suppose that on March the 1st, that's when we were all in Singapore told to go home. That's when everything sort of started to sort of ramp up. So working from home was the norm. Everyone sort of knew that this is going to be a long-term event. So what are we going to do about it? So immediately IT sort of came and invested in BlueJeans. We had Skype automatically sent out to everyone. We've got 17,000 people in India, so they were all on basically desktops or thin clients. So they were all given laptops. We had trucks going around to where the guys lived, so everyone had laptops so they could work efficiently there. So then it sort of looked back at the offices. So the offices were totally empty. We had IT increased our pipes going in, so 7 times the amount of data which we had pre-pandemic to now. That's because everyone was just on laptops and BlueJeans, etc. going forward. So the C-suite we're looking at, so driven by HR, collaboration with IT and property. So what can we do about this? So the idea was future work now. So let's adopt some flexible working going forward. So staff were given a choice, whether a note came around said, you know, given the fact that everyone's working at home now, you can have a choice to work from home permanently or work from the office permanently or split between. So expressions of interest were sent out to all employees, so they could then choose how many days a week they wanted to spend in the office. And most people were 2 or 3 days a week in the office. And so with our calculations, we could then see what the peak days were during the week, and we could see what the maximum utilization is going to be. So that means that's a maximum amount of space we need in order to accommodate all our staff, which means that there's surplus space there, which we could then either negotiate the lease or exit that space as well. So that gave one area of savings as well. But on the other hand, it's all very well saving space, etc. But there again, you need to give something back to the space. You give something back to the people when they come in. So it's bringing. So we had this catchphrase of twice the experience, half the space. So what's going to draw people back to the office is going to be something rather than that everyone's used to at home now. So you can make your favourite cup of coffee, your favourite tea, or something like that. So bring something into the office now. A great barista with a bit of character, some pastries, a bit more F&B, which we had before. And also the safety side as well is extremely important. So it's having the cleaners being visible to show that staff that everything is being cleaned, you know, X number of times a day, etc., which is going to happen as well, which is to give that. So addendum to contracts. So we would sign up on two days a week. So that was then given an addendum to your actual contract. So that's going to be reviewed, I think, at the end of or beginning of next year, just to sort of see how that's working. So what we're finding at the moment is that people have got used to working from home. So we were expecting that about 50 or 60% of people would come back, given the utilisation studies. But that's sort of about 30, 40%. But in the CBD, it's slightly higher in Singapore. China and Hong Kong, it's about 70% because they work in a different way compared to the likes of Singapore and London. So that's how we've actually sort of set that. So people's contracts are actually signed and to say how many days per week. And then there will be a time whereby you can actually go back and revisit that sort of side as well. Basically, to date, we've identified that 68% of our staff have signed up for a hybrid contract. That may seem a bit low, but I think you've got to imagine as well, in the banking industry, there's a lot of people which are under regulatory side as well. Sure. So that means your dealing rooms, your compliance, your M&A people, etc., etc. So that takes a large chunk of that away as well. Employee feedback has been pretty positive. And it's sort of work-life balance on that sort of side. It's well-being. So to the home and the hybrid contracts, some of our surveys, which we get onto later on. That's the most beneficial and the most highly sought-after contracts which we have. So the working from the home and the hybrid side.
So if you look at the sort of drivers for that behaviour originally. Obviously, in the Singapore context, we were 100% at home for a while. So you kind of look at it from a cost control perspective, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but you look at cost control and you say, okay, there's no point in having the office while this is going on. But then there's obviously the forward-looking piece of what happens when we get back to a normal, whatever that is. So in terms of the strategy piece of that, was it more around what your staff are telling you they would prefer to do, or more around what you see as a more efficient way of working, or just what you see as the future? What was the actual driver to say, you know what, we're going to go out to the staff, we're going to ask them how many days they want to do, and then we're going to make that happen? What actually drove that process? Was it more around efficiency or more around where you think business and activity is going?
I suppose the initial driver was just to see the efficiency side, but it's opening up to the staff to see what do they want. So basically all our data was driven by the staff. Okay. So if they wanted to be in the office 2 or 3 days a week, or 2 days or 1 day, or work from home, that was all put into the data, and then that sort of was calculated into, you know, how much space we actually need. And that's done for all of our major markets, and it's trickled down to all of the smaller countries as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Nick. Manjit, if I can turn to you. Obviously, you're in the creative industry. Collaboration, I'm guessing, and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth either, but is a fairly large part of that. How does that affect your strategy around flexible work from home, etc.? So that's the first part of the question. I'm not going to miss you out. I'm going to give you 2 like I've given everybody else. The second part is, where do you think you sort of fit in your peer group or competitor set in regards to that?
Thank you, Chris, for having me here. I mean, the pandemic has definitely shifted organizational life, right? And across, our holding company, WPP, and even our brand, Ogilvy, I think we have embraced the hybrid working approach. We were not dictating, how many days employees are, required to come back to the office. But I mean, what, the pandemic has shown is, employees have been able to work fairly effectively, right? But at the same time, I mean, we are also, reminding our employees on the role of the office and what it does in terms of essentially, getting people to come together, to socialize, to essentially then drive creative ideas, brainstorm with one another. We are starting to essentially see a lot more of that coming through. And as a result of that, I mean, employees are, starting to come back to the office as Singapore has eased the restrictions since the 26th of April. And again, I mean, the role of the office is critical because, I mean, in our business, in a creative business, I mean, if you are, just trying to, come up with ideas on your own, I mean, the ideas are only as good as an individual, right? So, I mean, in our creative business, we bring our people together, we brainstorm, we try to push boundaries. And at the end of the day, it's about, not just the ideas, but the social aspect of trying to get people together as well that we have seen, encouraging our employees to essentially come back to the office. And, we are seeing, close to 50–60% of our employees now back in the office in Singapore. As for our competitors, I believe, they are probably taking a similar approach. Although I've heard of some competitors who are essentially running campaigns to essentially get employees to come back to the office, right? So again, I mean, for Ogilvy, we have embraced the hybrid working approach. It is starting to work well. I mean, I'm starting to see a lot of employees back in the office. I mean, we see a good spike of attendance, midweek days, Tuesdays to Thursdays, and then, you see, a gradual reduction on Fridays, at close to 50–60% on average coming back in a week.
Thank you. And that gives me quite a good segue into the next question. So as a consultancy service, we spend a lot of time with leadership in various different industry types. And the feeling I get from a lot of those meetings is that a lot of business leaders are very comfortable around talking about flexible working and the benefits to the employee. Some who have more of a view that they would like to get people back to the office are less comfortable espousing those views. And I think partly that's got to do with people want to be seen as forward-looking and forward-thinking. And there could be a view that sort of looking back to where we were pre-pandemic is looking backwards, not looking forwards. I think when you look at what's gone on in the press recently, Airbnb CEO Brian Chesky, I don't know if you saw his comments, but I'll read them out to you. His comment was, employees can work from home forever. Working at the office is now a relic from the past. And his other question was, would the office take off if we invented it today? Complete flip side of that, you go to Lord Sugar. So for those of you who don't know who Lord Sugar is, he's a very high profile businessman in the UK. He's fairly punchy in his views, and he gave some fairly punchy views to the tabloid press in the UK over the last couple of days. And I'll quote him too. It's time for everyone to get off their lazy backsides and their Peloton bikes and get back to the office. So my question, and I know all of you are going to sit and go, no thanks, I don't want this one. My question to any of you, do you think there is a diversity between where senior management are sitting on working from home or working flexibly in the office, or do you think the two things are aligned? And I'm not talking necessarily in your own company, because that's a very hard question for all of us to answer because we're all employees. But when you look at it across the market, do you think there's a difference? Hugh, could I ask for your views on that?
Yeah, I was just trying to compute a sensible answer. WFH working from home, WFGC working from the golf course. We were chatting earlier on with Albert Ovidi.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that we have a responsibility for in our leadership roles, I mean, let's face it, we're not young anymore. You know, we're heading towards the sunset of our time, okay? But we have influence by the nature of our jobs, our titles, our experience, our relationships within and outside of our organizations. But we do have a massive obligation to listen and understand what the 20-somethings and the 30-somethings really want. We've had some challenging times with some of my colleagues. I've had a couple of guys in tears at home, some young graduates around the region. Desperate. They live in tiny apartments. Hard, really hard. Is being back in the office the answer to that? Well, partly, I think, because it's a community, right? Every organisation talks about its community and its culture. So I'm not dodging the question. Do you want my opinion?
I'd love you.
Okay. I think the office it's a nest, right? It's a nest for mummy and daddy birds, and it's a nest for the youngsters. And they all do different things in that nest. But that works. The nest works, right? Happy to see change. Happy for people to have that ability to improve their work-life balance, and if they are caregivers or whatever it is that they do. But you know, we as leadership, talent management, we need then to make sure that how we expect them to perform over a period of time. So how their objectives are set. Somebody might say, well, I quite enjoy working from home, and actually I'd quite like to cut my hours. I'd like to work just 3 days a week instead of 5. Those are the sort of questions that I think people are beginning to ask now, because they've got used to, in the last 2 years, having more time with their family, or, you know, they're saving an hour and a half or 2 hours a day because of the commute, right? Very important factors. On the balance, as a manager of assets, we're not seeing people give up space. I'm interested, Nick, on your view on whether that efficiency drive, how much space have you given up? It's not a challenge, I'm just genuinely interested. But we've seen a lot of companies say, well, we could give it up, but actually we had a plan to grow this part of the business, but we didn't have enough seats. So now we're going to reconfigure, and we're going to use that capacity to develop another part of the business. Now, I'm sure, Chris, you're better placed than I am to say, well, we know of companies that have contracted. I'm sure they have. But we're not seeing it particularly in our portfolio. Maybe that's because Asia is still very much a growth economy. Have I answered it?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay.
Nick, if I can put a question to you, and it's partly around Hugh's nesting analogy. So given the fact that you've been pretty proactive around the sort of flexible work piece in Standard Chartered, how do you deal with maintaining a culture within the firm when people are in the office less? And I know this is a really tough question, but are there any initiatives that are being run or any thought process around that? and how you're approaching that? Because I think that's probably quite an interesting one for everybody that's listening.
Yeah, throughout the pandemic, we've had HR have been issuing surveys just to sort of see how everyone's doing. So that's from well-being, from mental health. You know, how is your line manager, you know, embracing the team and you know, making sure that that everyone's on the same page. You know, from their objectives sort of side. It's having those coffee mornings, but virtual coffee mornings, for want of a better term, and you know, it's getting a cross section of the team, and just asking, you know, what's on your mind, what can we do better, and things like that. So that's throughout the pandemic. That's what we've had as well, and it's down to, you know, leaders basically to take that initiative and take it on as well. So we've had these surveys as well, and you know, and obviously we've had some information from feedback from HR as well, to, you know, what to do, etc. So that's how we've tackled it. And in fact, we have an annual survey called My Voice, and basically that's increased. Like the D&I side's increased, the productivity side's increased. Commitment to the bank has increased as well. So all of those have increased during the pandemic side, so which is quite interesting, because, you know, people weren't allowed to go into the office, or if they were, it's only in a limited sort of format.
So you use that feedback then, I presume, because one of the other questions that crosses my mind, when you look at the Singapore government's push around creating jobs for new graduates, creating jobs for people reskilling, people learning through digital courses, learning on Zoom, learning on Teams is one thing. But, and again, I don't want to sound archaic here, but the learning process to me was always sitting next to an experienced person, seeing what they do all day, seeing how they engage with clients, seeing how they engage with other people in the business. Frankly, listening to phone calls, if you're an open plan, and you understand and you learn what's going on. To me, that's a massive challenge. For any fresh graduates coming in. I know when we were allowed to come back to the office, I met people that had worked at JLL for 6-9 months that I'd never met face to face before. Yeah. So you do look at it and say, are we doing a disservice to the new generation of employees that are coming through by having flexible work policies? I don't think that that's true, but what I do think is we would do them a disservice if we don't address it. And how do you address it? So I'm kind of some ways answering my own question, but I'd like all three of you viewpoint. You look at it and say the manager of the future, actually he's not just a business manager, he's got to be a communicator, he's got to be a motivator, and he's got to be able to do that remotely. Because a lot of his people you won't see day to day. Anybody have any particular views around those pieces? I'm happy to nominate.
No, I think, you know, for us, I think at the end of the day, Chris, I mean, when it comes to culture, it is about, you know, the employer and employee reaching a common middle ground, right? And as you rightly pointed out, right, I think the role of the leader is to essentially inspire, you know, and, you know, for the younger workforce is for them to basically, you know, be comfortable that, you know, when they make an effort to come to the office, you know, their supervisors are there, their managers are there, you know, they can essentially get some ideas or even brainstorm, you know, ideas with their supervisors, right? And I mean, what we are seeing in our business is, you know, we are starting to see more of the youngsters coming back to the office, right? I mean, maybe partly because, you know, we are located in the CBD, and you know, they're naturally coming back to the office. You know, they see the office space as, you know, a space to socialize, and you know, when their managers are in the office, I mean, you know, it gives them an opportunity to just reconnect. Yeah. Right, and again, I mean, as an organization, you know, I mean, the whole concept of DEI, I mean, you know, inclusion is a key component in our overall culture building initiative. Yeah. Right, and you know, we make an effort to constantly listen to our employees, the younger generation, understand their needs, and then at the same time, you know, learn and iterate. Right? I mean, we're all going through this journey. The employers are going through this journey. Employees are going through the journey. I think the important aspect is essentially, you know, to listen, and then at the same time, you know, try to create a space that delivers, you know, the best experience for our employees, right? So that it gives them a reason to come to the office and not just come to the office because they have a work that needs to be done in the office, right? Yeah.
I mean, personally, I totally agree with that. I mean, when you look at it, what's one of the benefits? There's always benefits to come out of bad situations, but one of the benefits coming out of COVID for sure is, as employees, and we're all employees of one form or another, the desire of the employers to create a better place to work, which is a benefit for all of us. I think it's phenomenal. And we're seeing that out of pretty much every decision maker we talk to at the moment. And I think if you kind of sum up where our conversation's been this morning, I think the biggest challenge is knowing where it stops, as in what the percentage is. I think most people, especially in a Singapore context, we've only just got back to 100% in the office. So we've only really just got to the point where it's the company that needs to make the decision alongside their employees of what that workplace looks like. Because prior to that, we were at 75% or we were at 50%, whereas now the kind of rubber hits the road and people have to make a conscious choice around it, and it's not dictated by pandemic regulations. I thought that was a great conversation, guys. I really appreciate your time. Manjit, Nick, Hugh, thank you very much. I will now hand over for the next panel session. Thank you.